Hi, Mary Reed. Welcome to my Meet the Beekeeper for Texas Bee Supply Monthly magazine. It is so good to have you here. There are going to be a lot of people that when they see your face are going to be like, Mary Reed is there talking to Chari. We've known each other for a few minutes.
I'll say, yeah.
A while. And I'm just so thrilled you accepted this invitation. Tell our readers and our viewers a little bit about what you've been up to over the last few months.
Sure. Well, Chari, thanks for inviting me to sit and chat with you this evening. And anybody who's listening to this, say hello if we've met, and even if we haven't met. But yeah, so just for anybody who doesn't know me, I was most recently the former chief apiary inspector for Texas Apiary Inspection Service. And if you're a new beekeeper and you're not familiar with what that office does, it is the state agency responsible for mitigating any pests and diseases in managed honeybee colonies across the entire state. And so that office primarily looks at commercial beekeeping operations, but they also visit with small scale beekeepers as well. So they're there if you need them. I worked for apiary inspection out in Texas for about 8 years, the 4 most recent years being the chief there. And then recently, earlier this year, I moved to Florida, which is my home state. Because I accepted a job with the Florida Department of Agriculture, working for their Division of Plant Industry. And under that division, there are 5 bureaus, and I work for the Bureau of Plant and Apiary Inspection. I'm actually the assistant chief for that bureau. And I oversee now specifically plant inspection. I do have a little bit of collaboration and overlap with apiary inspection, fortunately, so I still have that tie there. But my main focus now is plant inspection. And so what our bureau does is we regulate the movement of nursery stock in and out of the state, any sort of agricultural product coming in or leaving. We kind of have our hands in that pot. And we also, like with apiary inspection, we are constantly surveying for pests and diseases that can affect plant material or significant agricultural products. And actually, one of the cooler parts of my job, I guess, are with our bureau, we actually survey for exotic fruit flies. And I'm mostly excited about this just because it's so novel to me, this little niche of the world, is that we are constantly throughout the year surveying for these specific fruit fly species that we don't have in Florida, but are considered very problematic for specifically fruits and vegetables. In Florida has a lot of fruits and vegetables that are significant to the economy. And so we want to make sure that we don't have any of these fruit flies coming in and damaging that product or those produce options. And so, so throughout the state, we have traps set up that are constantly surveyed, and we are constantly looking for these fruit flies. And if we detect one, then we, take actions to enhance surveying and take eradication measures if needed. So I just think that's super cool because it's just so important to our entire agricultural industry, and something that it's like a united understanding in our division that if we find a fruit fly that we're all gonna pitch in and take action as soon as possible. So in a nutshell, I guess a very large nutshell, that's kind of what I do these days. So a little less apiary, a little more plant, but still kind of a mix of both.
That's so important. I mean, how wonderful of an impact for Florida, and I won't say the rest of the nation, because the fruit fly, I know a little bit about that. It's the little pest that comes with our bananas. from the grocery store.
Yeah. So
Totally a pest.
not that we have to go down the fruit fly channel, but it's interesting that these fruit flies look very different from the ones that we typically think of showing up in our houses. They're actually pretty large insects. So if it's, if you've got the curiosity bug, and I, dive right into that world and learn a bit more, because it's really interesting. And it's not only Florida that puts in this effort. Texas has a program, California has a program. These big states that have really significant agricultural industries have a focus on these insects. So, and a bunch of others, but usually there's a program specifically for fruit flies, believe it or not.
I guess I assumed that, but who knew, right?
Right, I did it, that's for sure.
I'm thrilled that they've got you. And I know that the rest of the beekeepers that see this video will be thrilled to hear what you're doing, because that is a huge, that's a huge responsibility, and what a wonderful opportunity for you. And I do want to point out, you were the first female chief apiary inspector for Texas. So
yeah, well, hopefully a good one. So
of course, are you kidding?
So
you have a wonderful following. We miss you already. And
gosh, well, I do miss Texas, that's for sure. And working with all the beekeepers out there, that was definitely the biggest thing that I knew I was gonna miss when I left. So, but it's nice to still have some level of connection with you all.
Well, you're not going. I will always find you, and you do answer my messages, which is wonderful.
I try. I'm not always the best, but I try.
You do great. Are you kidding me? I want to kind of give, because we try to talk about what the month is coming up. And I know, even though you're somewhat removed from it now, your knowledge is just, well beyond most of ours on understanding. We've got summer that is here. I'm not even sure that the calendar says it is yet, but it sure feels like it. We're all exceeding 100 degrees over the last several days. And we're looking at, most beekeepers that aren't in just beginning are extracting, or will have extracted by the time, July, mid-July or so. What is it from your perspective as an apiary inspector, or that part of your past? What can you just impart on us with your knowledge that you still retain, I'm sure, and hear in your sleep, of the importance of things that we need to know about pests and diseases and so forth, as summer is really approaching in here?
Yeah, so summer, especially in Texas, is such a tough time for not only beekeepers, but the bees themselves. I mean, we'll dive into pest issues for sure, but when I think about summer and beekeeping, the first thing that comes to mind really is nutrition. And in a lot of parts of the state, I don't want to say the entire state, but in a majority, I would say the majority of the state, there's not an abundance of nutrition available out in the environment for honeybees. And so, especially if you're thinking about, or you've extracted honey, you've pulled that resource from the bees. So you want to make sure that you're giving them something back, or making sure that they have what they need from a nutritional perspective. And that doesn't mean just honey, but it's also checking for pollen. I think that's something that beekeepers, especially if you're new to the beekeeping world, pollen is something that's often overlooked, but is such a critical resource for honeybees throughout the year. And then water. Of course, we all need water, especially when it's hot outside. So your bees definitely need water as well. So this part of the year is a critical time to ensure that your bees have a reliable source of water. And I'm not going to remember the number of gallons a day that a colony collects, but it's definitely more than one.
It is.
So, again, emphasizing it's a reliable source of water for those bees, because it's when it's hot out there, they use that water to cool their hive down and maintain that temperature, ideal temperature that they're trying to keep. So making sure they have the food that they need, and diversity, ideally. I know that's not always obtainable in the summer, but just making sure that they have something to feed on, but then also water. But when it comes to, talking about pests and diseases, when you've pulled honey supers off and you've extracted them, that's kind of a critical time and a critical opening for a beekeeper to see what their pests and disease levels are, and if they're seeing any symptoms in their hive, specifically Varroa. Whether you're new to beekeeping or you're a veteran, I'm sure you've come across or heard the word Varroa. And so once you've pulled honey supers off, that's such a critical time because typically if your goal is to produce honey at any level, you don't really have a lot of available treatments to control for Varroa when you have honey supers on. There are some options out there, but some of them are temperature sensitive, and some of the more effective ones say do not use when you have honey supers on. So from a beekeeping perspective, that's really tricky and really difficult. You're tempted to put a treatment in there just because you want to make sure your bees are staying healthy and their Varroa levels are low. But you also have to take it from a human health perspective and make sure that you're not contaminating your honey. So once you've pulled those supers off, that is an excellent opportunity for you to go in there and collect a sample, I'm just going to encourage you to do some sort of Varroa shake, whether that's powdered sugar or an alcohol wash, because those are the two most reliable ways of knowing what your Varroa levels are. So go ahead and collect your sample, do a shake, see what your Varroa levels are, and implement a method of control if you need to, if you find that your Varroa levels are still manageable or low. Maybe use implement another method of prevention. So you kind of have to know what resources are available to you so you can make that judgment call on the fly. But yeah, trying to think if there's anything other that ties in with those thoughts.
I want to poke my head there in that spot and say that we've really just shoved honeybeehealthcoalition.org down our beekeepers' throats, but it's such a good resource.
Yeah.
And one thing I think that's under promoted or under stressed is the need to alternate treatments. What is your thoughts on that as far as can we do Apavar twice, or do we need to do Apavar and then something else, or how often do we need to alternate treatments?
Yeah, that's such a great question and great topic to bring up and discuss, because it is a legitimate concern, not only in the beekeeping industry, but really any industry where you're trying to control a pest on a host. And in beekeeping, fortunately with Varroa, we have lots of options out there. Not only chemical treatments, which we'll dive into that, specifically with your question, but also, other methods of prevention with the hope and idea of preventing Varroa levels from reaching a point at which you have to take stronger measures. And so this ties into a conversation about integrated pest management, which the Honeybee Health Coalition talks about. And it's a method of preventing and controlling a pest on a host that is, wasn't developed specifically for beekeeping, but it's actually broadly used in other agricultural industries. And this was a methodology that was developed because there was a concern about the overuse of chemicals in agriculture, and that they were seeing issues of pests developing resistance to chemical products and chemical treatments. So the idea with integrated pest management is that you're using these non-invasive preventive measures first to try and prevent, we'll use Varroa as our example, because that's what we all know, prevent Varroa from becoming an issue, but moving into more invasive techniques, such as chemical treatments, only as needed. And so in beekeeping, those non-invasive preventive measures are screen bottom boards, drone comb removal, hygienic queens. Now, caveat with that is that you have to take into consideration your operation. So some of these techniques make a lot of sense and are more achievable for small scale beekeepers who have just a handful of hives, whereas some of these techniques don't make any sense for a commercial beekeeper just because they're managing hundreds to thousands of colonies. So you have to take that into consideration. When we talk about chemical treatments, there are quite a few for Varroa control that are really effective. The one that is currently still considered the most effective one is Apavar, which its active ingredient is amitraz, but it's a synthetic chemical treatment, but it is still shown to be the most effective one. So it's tempting to just use that repeatedly. But that goes back to, we could put ourselves into a situation where if we're using this chemical repeatedly, then we could develop a Varroa that is resistant to that treatment. And then we don't have that treatment in our toolbox to use. So ideally, we would rotate through chemical treatments if that's something that you're using in your operation. Rotate through them so you're not using the same one over and over again, back to back. Now I don't have, I haven't done the research. I haven't done, I'm not a toxicology expert, pesticide expert. So this is probably like, if you're wanting to get into the nitty gritty of, well, how many times a year can I use Apavar and still get away with it? I think that's a question for the manufacturer of the product. And if you ever have questions about a specific product and how to use it, how to apply it, or impacts that the product may have on the bees or the environment, contact the manufacturer. That's what they're there for, is to answer those very specific questions. But at the most basic level, it's, we're trying to avoid using a treatment back to back over and over again. And this doesn't only apply to Apavar, it also applies to other chemical products that we use in hives that we consider safer. So for example, like oxalic acid or formic acid, they operate differently. They interact with a Varroa mite differently than amitraz does, but that still doesn't mean that Varroa mites could develop a resistance to those acids. So, just something to take into consideration. And that's kind of the beauty of the Honeybee Health Coalition. And that Varroa guide that they developed is that they have put together this packet of information that outlines all of these resources, pros and cons, when they're most effective, how to apply them, can you apply them when they have honey supers on, all those details, so that as a beekeeper, you can look at it, study it, and decide for yourself, make an action plan for yourself, essentially, and decide for yourself, okay, when am I going to use these? When can I use them? If I'm in this type of scenario, what would I do? So you're kind of prepared in advance a little bit for almost any situation.
Almost any situation. That's a great takeaway that you just said, that beekeepers really just almost need to write a log of a plan, making a plan. We were taught that early on as beekeepers to have a plan when you go in, and that way you don't get off, doing something and then run out of time to do what you needed to do.
Yeah.
Really and truly, that's an awesome recommendation that we think through those treatments, because I always think about Kumafos,
Uh-huh.
Checkmate Plus, not to beat up on them, but was one of the first chemicals to come out and one of the first to show resistance.
Yeah.
And it's still on the market.
Yep.
But there are quite a few studies that show that it's just really like putting nothing on a
Yeah.
lot of resistant bees that have become resistant to that. So that's a very good takeaway. I want all of our listeners to really heed that, and I will as well. It's just like drawing a roadmap of, it's this temperature outside, it's this population. I need to have a plan of alternation.
Yeah.
And OA, that's, I'm gonna say it's really overused. We've used it many times, but
Hmm.
I guess I didn't think about it becoming one. Because I think people think that it doesn't, because it's a different delivery method. It's the,
Yeah.
either the sublimation or the dribble. But it's there too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, nothing is safe from, resistance from developing. It's just a different type of resistance mechanism, essentially. But yeah, going back to making an action plan, I definitely, I mean, I promote it, doing that, and sitting down and deciding on what you want to do with your operation. Look through those options that you have and decide for yourself on what you want to use in your honeybee colonies, and when you're going to use them. And I know it's hard, sometimes to just sit down and do it because it may not be an immediate need. But I just don't want beekeepers to be in a situation where they do check their Varroa levels and they're sky high and they don't know what to do. I'd rather you guys just be prepared and at least think about it in advance of that possibility, so that you aren't, totally caught off guard. And in the Honeybee Health Coalition, as the goal of, kind of providing us supporting supplemental material for the guide, they created a online decision tool, to try and walk you through kind of some different scenarios. And all you have to do is, I think you answer like 5 questions.
Right. Very
Um,
simple. Very simple.
yeah, so I tell beekeepers just play around with that, and try different scenarios. And the questions are relating to what's going on in your hive. So, like, do you have honey supers on? How much brood is in there? What's the population like? And based off of your answers to those questions, it provides you which treatment methods are recommended for that situation, and you
And
can click on them and see, why those were recommended, and the other ones that weren't recommended, you can still click on them to read through and see why it wasn't recommended, so something extra to play around with.
it is, and I'm glad you brought that up. It even goes as far as, I don't want to do chemical. I want to stick with only organic, acids, or just stay on that bottom part of that pyramid. It's just
Yeah.
a very, very good tool. I made a link to it for the May issue. And I
Oh,
think the
awesome.
readers appreciated that. And July is all about Varroa. Honey extraction, we don't, beekeepers want to go, but I'm extracting honey. I don't have time to
I
talk about the
know.
pest, but it really goes hand in hand, because the minute that you pull those honey supers, you really have to have that foremost in your mind. Signs of, is there something, and there may not be, signs of disease in a colony that you, in your tenure here, that you most often saw people overlook? So,
Hmm.
was it deformed wing or hairless, or was there something that you felt like, gosh, if they had just seen that, or something that stood out to you that was before you even did a test that you, oh, I know right away? Was there something you could help us with that?
Yeah, well, nothing's coming to mind specifically, like symptoms that were overlooked. I guess the only thing related to that, I would say it goes back to our conversation about nutrition and pollen specifically. That, we get so excited about seeing the amount of honey that's produced in the hive because that's one of our goals, maybe. And we also get really excited about brood production and how well the queen is laying and the workers. So that almost kind of distracts us from focusing in on the pollen resources. So that's probably, as far as something being overlooked, that in my experience, that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed working with beekeepers, because sometimes we would be called out to look through hives because if there was a concern of disease, like they saw a drastic decrease in their population levels, and it in some situations it was a combination of factors, which happens more often than not. There's a combination of issues going on, but a lot of times one of those factors or the factor was just they didn't have food to eat. But in going back to, symptoms of disease or a pest issue, the one that sticks out to me, and it's not something that's overlooked because a lot of these symptoms, you're going to see it, in the brood. That's what you want to look at. Every time you open up your hives, don't be afraid to go down into that brood chamber. I know some beekeepers are concerned about disturbing the bees by doing that, but you're not going to disturb them. You get in there. You've already opened the box. Get in there.
You're a beekeeper.
Yeah, you're a beekeeper. And you want to know, you want to see what's going on in that brood chamber, because that is going to paint the picture for you on how healthy your bees are and if there's an issue going on. So always go down to your brood chamber, look at, at least 2 frames of brood. And the brood is where you are going to see any signs of pest or disease issues popping up. So I wouldn't say that I've had the experience of somebody completely overlooking it, maybe just not even looking in the brood chamber. Maybe that's the overlooking. Yeah. But what we've had quite a few phone calls about was concerns about foul brood in their hives, which does happen. For sure. Foul brood does exist in Texas, so it's a good thing for beekeepers to be aware of and be cognizant of. But a lot of times, probably every single, well, I shouldn't say every single, 99% of the time, it wasn't a foul brood issue, it was actually a Varroa issue. And so that's where it kind of boils down to really educating yourself on honeybee biology and also how these diseases and pests are interacting with your bees and the brood. Because once you really know that stuff and get comfortable with it, you can kind of be your own detective and ask the appropriate questions to really figure out what the issue may be. And I know that the Apiary Inspection Office in Texas has a resource to try and help with, figuring out the difference between the 2 foul brood diseases and Varroa mites. So I'd recommend checking that out. But if you're ever in a situation where you are trying to, you recognize that there's an issue and you're not quite sure if it's foul brood or Varroa or something else, do not hesitate to reach out to the inspection office, because that's what they're there for, is to answer those questions. And they can come out and visit with you and take samples and do a little bit more of a thorough investigation into what's going on in that hive to try and really narrow down what the issue is. Because I don't want you to assume that if you're seeing an issue, oh, it's not, Mary said it's not foul brood,
Never
it's
assume that.
Varroa. Because there is a possibility that it's a disease issue. And so I don't want you to overlook that.
What, we've kind of backed off a little bit with our brand new beekeepers going down the foul brood route, because it just truly just scares them out of the hobby before they even get started good.
Yeah.
Are you, before you left, are we seeing any American foul brood at all, or is it primarily European foul brood?
So it's primarily European foul brood. And we most of the time we see it in the spring. In the last couple of years that I was there, we actually had quite a few instances where it popped up in the fall, which was kind of unusual for us from a historical perspective. So European foul brood exists, it's there, it could pop up in your hive. So it's a good one to know about. It's not a death knell for the hive. So there are steps that you can take as a beekeeper to resolve the issue. American foul brood, we have not had a positive case of American foul brood in Texas in quite a few years. I didn't have any positive cases when I worked there. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist in Texas. It's just that we're not seeing it as a major issue in the state. But, saying that, I still think it's so important for beekeepers to know about it and to understand the symptoms of it, because you just never know. But I don't want it to scare you. I don't want to scare anyone.
Well, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
On that. It really is. And just before we get too far from it, European foul brood ties exactly in with your nutrition. I mean,
yep. Definitely.
It is a nutritional issue. This ebb and flow that temperature and everything that happens.
It's a disease. Yep, definitely. It's a disease associated with stress. And so nutrition is a big factor, is a big stressor for a hive if they don't have what they need. And so, yeah, you can see that as one of the ways it pops up.
It really does. And I think that I feel almost feel vindicated, I want to say, because we stress nutrition so much, and you led this our discussion today with that, and we've always said you keep a good house for them, dry and well maintained, nutrition and Varroa under control. You pretty much cinched beekeeping.
Yeah.
And nutrition is really first. So you vindicated me. I feel I feel like I haven't been saying that for no reason.
No, it's really important. And I think that, if you talk to beekeepers, not just in Texas, but across the country, it's a big concern. The availability and the diversity of nutritional resources out there in the environment. So diversity is critical.
Huge.
Huge. And availability is a big one. So it's a good thing for, a beekeeper, no matter what size your operation is, it's just to be aware of what is out there in the surrounding area around your apiary, and making accommodations, whatever that means to you, to make sure that your bees are well fed.
Last question I want to ask you, how many times a year do you suggest that we test for Varroa?
I love this question because your true personality comes out with the response.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So whenever I gave talks, I loved giving talks on pests and diseases and Varroa monitoring, because I would tell beekeepers that you have to know yourself as a person to recognize how often you're going to monitor for Varroa. So I know what kind of person I am. I love data, and I love a schedule. So I would monitor every month, because I wanted to be able to track the changes in my hives over time. Now, not everyone's like that, and I recognize that. And every beekeeper is different, every operation is different. So the recommended minimum is 4 times a year, spaced out throughout the year. So you don't do the first 4 months of the year. You do spring, summer, fall, beginning of winter, to give you a very general basic idea of what's going on. But I would encourage you and challenge you to do it more than 4 times a year, just because it's going to paint a better picture for you on what's going on in your hive. And that's so critical to the overall health of your colony, especially, going back to extracting honey and producing honey, especially if your goal is to produce honey. Your bees need to be healthy and strong to collect honey. So you want to make sure that, their pest levels are low, disease levels are low, so that, you reach your goal in the end.
Very good advice. I'm also a numbers person and a notes person and a planner. So it's very good advice. And monthly, you can keep up with the numbers and see what they're doing. Mary, I can't thank you enough. I've taken enough of your time, and we're from the entire state of Texas and beyond. We're so proud of you, and please come back and visit us very soon.
Oh, I would love to.
At maybe at a seminar or
that'd be
something
fun.
at a time. Thanks so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure.
Great to see
the
you.
invitation.
You and I've known each other since 2014, and I truly I cherish your friendship, and your knowledge is wonderful. I'm so glad you got to share it with our listeners. And thanks again.
Thank you, Chari. It was a pleasure. And yeah, it was so great to chat with you.
And we will talk very soon.
All right. I'll hold you to it.
Thanks.